Good morning, everybody. Dave Schmidt along with Matt Nestor and producer Tom Warner. It's the Stateline Sports Hour, Saturday, September 3rd, 2016. Matt was up late, I was up late, and I know this guy was up late. Eric Van Dril from thepublicleague.com covers all the Chicago high school football, and I know he's doing basketball too, and he has a site that I like because it keeps me updated real well on Chicago Public League schools. And Eric, good to have you along. How much sleep did you get last night, buddy?
I got about 4 hours. I was up at 5:10 this morning, and I went to bed around 1 o'clock last night. So I'm on 4 hours of sleep, but I'm excited to be on with you guys.
I say, so you're well rested for a football season, right?
Exactly.
Hey, let's talk about the games you were at last night. Were you at the Phillips game last night? You know, Phillips had that great season last year.
I was. It was a crazy game. So Phillips, for those who don't know, won the Class 4A state championship last year. They returned a lot of guys on defense this year, but it's a pretty new team, relatively. New quarterback, a couple new skill position guys. But last night's game was insane. So opening kickoff, Richards does kind of a pooch kick. Phillips fumbles, Richards takes over, gets a field goal, and then next kickoff, Richards kicks off. Phillips kick returner fumbles. Phillips recovers the fumble. And then on the first play from scrimmage for the offense, Phillips' offense fumbles. And that was kind of the story of the first half for Phillips. Phillips lost 4 fumbles in the first half, 5 in the game, but still won. They won 28-20. It was a great victory for Phillips, given given the fumble issues and kind of how they responded to those issues.
And say, how are they? After 2 weeks, I don't know everything yet, but how are they kind of rounding into form, replacing so many guys from a state championship team?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, they really improved from week 1 to week 2. So week 1 they were upset by Fenwick. Phillips was actually up 20-0 against Fenwick, and early in the second quarter, and Fenwick ended up beating them 34-26. It was probably the biggest upset that we had up here in the Chicagoland area. Because Phillips was kind of expected to roll like they did, in that first quarter against Fenwick. But last night I feel like is a really, really important win for Phillips. I mean, just given the way that they won. Like I said, it's kind of a young team. And last night they also played almost the entire second half without their best player, who is a defensive tackle named Chris Elmore, who's committed to Western Michigan. He went down with an ankle injury with about, 8 minutes left in the third quarter. Despite all those issues, they won, and they won against a really good team in Richards, who's I think they've made the playoffs the last 7 years up in 6A or 7A.
Mm-hmm. One thing about the public league I know, Eric, is the challenge. I told you earlier, my wife's a graduate of Kelvin Park, so I like to follow them. What are the challenges of covering the public league for you? Because there's a lot of schools. Some schools qualify for the playoffs. Others aren't eligible for the playoffs. You got a lot of different balls you're tossing up in the air as you cover all those teams. Tell us why you decided to cover the public league like you did, and some of the things you face as doing that.
Yes, so I live in Chicago, and I've always been fascinated. Basically ever since I moved here about 5 years ago, I've been fascinated with the public league. I mean, I'm sure you guys read about it all the time. The crazy things that happen, the star athletes, things like that. So that was one element of why I wanted to cover the public league. Another element is just Chicago kind of gets so much negative attention, and I guess part of that is justified, with all the violence and poverty and all the issues that the city's going through. But a big reason why I wanted to start the website, thepublicleague.com, is to kind of focus on, positive elements. So, kids who are doing the right thing, who are working really hard, coaches, parents who are really doing the right thing. And, I've been able to kind of uncover a lot of those different stories thus far. The challenge, though, at this point is I'm one person, and there are over 100 schools in the public league. So just trying to figure out how to best cover as many schools as I can adequately has been a real struggle thus far, just because of sheer numbers.
From the outside looking in, we always talk about transfers and things like that, and Seems to be a lot in Chicago like that, especially involving the public league. From an inside perspective, how is some of that viewed when it comes to some of the transfers and things like that?
It's kind of a complicated question. It's a question that I've received quite a bit since I started covering the public league. But I guess there are kind of two phases to it. One phase is that for a lot of these kids, they need exposure. This is kind of the way that I look at it. So if you have a kid who's at kind of a lesser-known school who can't afford to travel in AAU season for basketball, so let's take basketball for example. That person needs to play at a bigger school where college coaches are going to see him play, and he needs to play well in front of those coaches in order to get out of maybe a dangerous neighborhood or something like that. So I feel like in that situation, I feel like transfers are a positive thing. The negative, the very negative aspect that I've seen just in doing this for about 2 months now, is that it sounds like there are coaches in the public league who kind of recruit players who are trying to steal players from.
You're being nice, Eric. Kinda is the word you used.
I haven't nailed down any exact stories, but I've heard. I've probably heard from 4 or 5 coaches who have said that this person is specifically trying to steal my seniors from this team, and it's just driving me crazy. Coaches like that, they shouldn't be doing that, obviously, and it's really disappointing when they're calling, a parent or they're calling a kid directly and saying, okay, this is why you should transfer here, for X, Y, and Z. I feel like that is obviously the worst aspect of the transfer, but there are some good aspects of it.
Eric, when you look at it, the IHSA and the Chicago Public League schools are really two identities. It's kind of like Guam is a part of America, but it's not a state. And in the Chicago Public League, they basically have their own transfer rules. They judge on those. They have other rules. Do you ever see a time when maybe there might be a separation or something between the two associations? Because it's getting harder for the IHSA to put their finger on certain things like that.
Yeah, that's true. Maybe at some point, in researching and doing my research when I was preparing to do this site, it seemed like that was a real possibility maybe 5-6 years ago. It sounded like the public league basketball coaches specifically were really upset with how the IHSA was running things. It seems like that's gotten a little bit better. But in terms of kind of governing the city, maybe there does need to be a governing body like the IHSA to come in and kind of crack down on some of the transfer issues, some of ineligibility issues. But the public league, from what I've heard from coaches, is trying to crack down on that. They're trying to do a better job, specifically this year versus the last few years. The thing is that with the budget cuts up here in Chicago for Chicago public schools, there aren't that many people, working in the CPS athletic office to kind of crack down and really monitor transfers. It's just kind of like everything else up here. It's money is tight, so they kind of have to get by with what they have at this point. But, maybe there is a situation, in the coming years where they split, but, I don't see it in the short term.
When we bring it back to football, through 2 weeks, what are some of the surprises up there in the public league?
That's a good question. I guess, for me, I don't know how many of your listeners know about Raby High School.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of our up-and-coming schools. They got to the second round in 3A last year. They were supposed to be, probably one of the 5 best teams in the city this year, and they got killed by Curie in week 1. They lost by 38 points. They gave up 49 in the first half. So that was a big surprise for me because I thought that game was going to be a lot more competitive than it ended up being. But other than that, up here we have kind of like the 4 elite teams. We have Morgan Park, Curie, Simeon, Phillips, and those teams, look like the 4 best going forward. The one surprise, I guess, is that Simeon is now 0-2, but they played Oak Park River Forest 1. Lost by 7, and then played Marist last night and lost by 10. So those are really, 2 really good programs. And I feel like Simeon's, pretty easily make the playoffs. They play Phillips next week, which is one of the two biggest games in the city next week. But other than that, not too many surprises. There's kind of a hierarchy that's established at this point, and nobody's really broken into that hierarchy yet.
We're talking with Eric Van Dril from publicleague.com. Check that page out. Also get him on Twitter. He keeps that updated a lot. As I mentioned about Kelvin Park, is they had to cancel or forfeit their first week's game, and I know they only had 14 supposedly last night against Westchester St. Joe. But there's also been a couple other schools that have had to forfeit games because of numbers. Are you seeing it as a concern for some of the City League schools as the season progresses?
Yeah, without a doubt. And it's weird up here. You mentioned the transfers before, but there's, with charter schools and schools like that, there are big public league, there are big high schools that have seen, significant numbers decreases over the last, just 5 years. Like a school like Crane, for example. I think that school can hold maybe 2,000 to 2,500 kids, and I think they have 200 in the school right now. So there are numbers that are decreasing quite a bit, and therefore football teams' numbers are going to decrease quite a bit. And also the other thing is, in terms of interest, a school like Amundsen, Steinman's last week had to forfeit a game against Morgan Park because they didn't have enough kids turn out during the summer and during the preseason.
They had to forfeit again last night, right? According to my score sheet, they did.
Oh yeah, I haven't looked into that.
Yeah.
I've been writing all morning. Maybe they did. But yeah, so there are issues in terms of turnout, and a lot of these. It's weird because I grew up in the suburbs. I grew up in St. Charles, and we had complete buy-in throughout the summer and throughout the preseason. But some of these schools up here get kids on the first day of school coming out for the football team. They're not there all summer. They're not there during the preseason, and in those cases, it's really, really difficult. So I feel like that's part of the aspect when you see the really low numbers is that kids just don't show up during the summer and the fall, and then it's kind of too late once school starts.
Well, Eric, we're going to let you get back to your writing, but thanks for taking time. You got a great site, and I really appreciate it. It helps out a whole bunch.
It's very good.
It's very good, and we wish you all the best of luck. We'll keep in contact, okay? Because I know you do basketball too. Does that sound good?
Yeah, that sounds great. I'd love to come on, anytime you guys want me to.
And keep up the good work because it really was needed in the public league, and they ought to be patting you on the back pretty heavy right now, bud.
Yeah, that's the feedback I've received. It's been positive across the board. So I really appreciate you guys having me on and for reading the site.
You bet. We've been talking to Eric Van Dril, the head guy at the publicleague.com. And I'll tell you what, it's hard for us to keep contact with all that stuff.
Right.
But that really has helped me out a lot.
Yeah, no, and he does, a great job, especially for just being him. There's nobody else helping him out or anything. He's got a pretty comprehensive site for just one guy covering 100 schools.
And he's he worked with Sun Times, a lot of big publications, so he knows what he's doing. He's just a young guy. He's younger than both of us, so that don't take much anymore. But he's a younger guy. He does a good job.